It's time for us to start playing with graphics. Specifically, we're going to add a jump graphic to our character for when we're jumping, so our player can tell when they're jumping and we can debug things a lot easier and figure out what we're doing as well. I think it's an easy, nice thing to get in, and it's going to show us quite a few interesting concepts. The first thing that we want to do is take a look at our sprite renderer. If I expand out the sprite renderer, it has a few fields on it. It's got the sprite, a color that allows me to tint it if I want to change the color. It kind of, not really the way that you want to change the color of your sprite most of the time, but you can modify it there. You've got a flip option that allows us to flip it upside down or left and right, which is something we'll get into shortly. And then a couple other options like the draw mode for tiling that we've already looked at. What we want to do though is change the sprite. So if we select the sprite by clicking on it, we can see all of our different alien sprites. I'm going to hold Control and use the mouse wheel, but you can also use this slider right here to get a big view of all of our sprites. And what I want is our jump sprite to appear when we're jumping. So let's find our jump sprite, click and drag it right in here, and there we go. We can see our jump sprite is there, but if I press play now, we're just going to have our jump sprite on permanently. And obviously, I can't jump and then click and drag the sprite out there at runtime. That would probably be pretty hard if I was trying to like, oh, here, now I'm in climbing. Oh, now I just took a hit. I got to drag them out. So that's not what we're going to do. Instead, we're going to stop playing. We're going to change it back to being the default one, which I believe was named front. Alien blue front. So we'll drag that back into the sprite so that he's got that default on. And we're going to write a little bit of code here that can change this sprite dynamically for us. Let's open up our player script. And first things first, at the top, we're going to need to get a reference to a sprite. We're going to need to know what sprite we want to put in. So we're going to add another serialized field. I'm going to do that right here after line 10. We'll add a serialized field. In fact, I'll just let that auto-complete for me. But instead of it being a private float, we're going to add a sprite. And we're going to call this underscore jump sprite with a semicolon at the end. So we have a serialized field, sprite, jump sprite. Now notice that we don't have the private keyword here. That's because this private keyword is redundant and just doesn't need to be here. I could put it there, but I don't need it. In fact, because I don't need it, I'm going to delete all three of these other ones and that fourth one. Let's delete the first one by double clicking on it, hit delete and delete. Now for these other three, I could do it a couple different ways, but check out this cool trick. If you hold down Alt, click, so I've got my cursor here already, so let's click the cursor there, then hold down Alt, click and drag over the private keywords. I can block select them and then just hit delete and hit delete one more time and I'm good to go. Now make sure that you click away so that everything else you type in the future doesn't go to all three of those lines. It's a neat little trick though to get rid of things or to paste things in when you want to kind of batch update. So now we have our jump sprite. Let's save, go back into Unity, see what that looks like, and then figure out how we're going to hook it up and write the code for it in a moment. So we'll minimize the code. Go make sure our alien is selected and our player should show up in the inspector with a new field, the jump sprite option. Now we just need to go find our sprite. And I can click this little circle to pop up every sprite in the game. That's probably, well, actually, surprisingly, it's finding the one that I want right here, jump blue. But if you find that there are too many, you can always just search. So I can just search for jump and find my blue jump right here and just double click on it. Notice there are two of them. I want the one that matches. I used the full size one, so I'm going to use the full size one here. I'm going to pick the one that's 128 by 256, not the one that's 135 by 191. So just got to make sure that I'm using the same set of sprites. So I'll double click on that one. Now I've got my sprite here. And I need to go into the code and make it actually set it or switch it at runtime when we're playing or when we're jumping. So to do that, we're going to go back to our player script. And then let's find the spot where we set our grounding. So is grounded is equal true or is grounded is equal to false. And we essentially want to set the sprite based on whether or not we're grounded or not. We have a couple ways that we could do this. The first way that we could do it and the way that we're going to start is by adding some curly braces. So right after the if hit.collider, we're going to add a curly brace on a new line. And then after the is grounded is true, we're going to add another curly brace. So what that's going to do is allow me to write more than one statement after this if. So the if check before was only running one line of code. Now it'll run all of the code that's inside of these braces. Right now that's one line, but let's add another line. So if they are on the ground, we want to set our sprite to its default sprite value. So let's say sprite renderer dot sprite equals, and we need our default sprite. We don't have that yet, so let's just say underscore default sprite. We'll add that in a moment, and we'll fix that error up. Now let's go down to our else section. After the word else, we'll add a new line and again, a squiggly brace. Now I'm going to delete this other closing squiggly brace here because I want to go down 2 lines and re-add it. I just wanted to move that so that the is grounded was inside of the 2 squiggly braces. After that is grounded check, or is grounded line being set, we'll add a new line and we'll say sprite renderer dot sprite equals underscore jump sprite. So what's this doing? If we're on the ground, it's going to say is grounded is true, or set is grounded to be equal to true, and set our sprite to the default one, which we haven't figured out yet, but we're going to do that in a moment. If we're not on the ground, it's going to set us to the jump sprite and set is grounded to false so that we can use that for our jump checks. All right, so how are we going to get our default sprite? Well, first we need to create a field for it. So I'll select it and hit Alt-Enter and let it generate a field. Remember, I can hit F12 to go up here and see my field. But this field doesn't have a value. So if I play right now, my character is going to disappear. Let's try it out. Let's save, go into Unity, and press play. And look at that, our player just totally disappeared. The other interesting thing to note is that if I try to jump and have my player appear, it doesn't actually show back up. And the reason for that, if we look at our little gizmo here, is that our sprite renderer no longer has an extents. It no longer has a bottom, so it doesn't have a bottom to draw the ground from it and thinks that the ground is at our center. So we're going to have to make some small changes here. So the first change that we're going to do is get the actual default sprite. So we're going to stop playing, we'll go back to our player script, and we're going to do something called caching. We're going to cache this default sprite when our object is created or awakened or our level has started. To do that, we're going to add in a new method, a new one of the Unity methods, one of the special ones that we get from the mono behavior class. We're going to add 2 new lines here, right above on draw gizmos, and I'm going to say void awake. This is a special method that gets called at the start of the object's life. So at the start of our player's life, when this level first loads, this awake method will get called. And what I want to do in the awake method is get the sprite that's already on our sprite renderer. So I'll say default sprite equals, and now I've got to get my sprite renderer and get the sprite from it. So I'd say get component sprite renderer dot sprite. And this will get the sprite renderer, then get the sprite, and save that off to this default sprite variable. Let's save that and see if it works real quick. Go back into Unity, and we should be able to press play and see our sprite changing and our grounding continuing to work. There we go. So we're on the ground, we jump, and it goes to a jump, and as soon as we hit the ground, we're back to the ground sprite. So far, I think it's looking pretty good, but there was something there that you might have thought about or might have noticed, especially if you're experienced in development at all. And that's that we're getting this sprite renderer component a lot, and we could probably cache that too in Awake. While we're caching things, if we're going to get a component, and it's something that we're going to get often when the update frame is every single frame of our game, so that's pretty often, then we should just cache that component. So let's do that. Let's take line 31, and I'm going to copy the entire line here. Copy. I'm going to put it up here on line 16 and paste. I'm going to hit the home key to go to the beginning of the line, and then delete out the sprite renderer by holding Shift Delete. Oops, no, wrong key. Sorry. Control Z, Control Delete. I hit Shift Delete is the line, Control Delete is the word. So I got rid of that uppercase sprite renderer, and then I'm going to add a underscore to the beginning of this. So add Shift and the minus to get my underscore. I'll generate a field for it by hitting Alt-Enter. It's going to give us a nice field right up at the top, right by the sprite. And then we'll just start using this sprite renderer instead of all these get component sprite renderer calls. So I'm going to copy sprite renderer onto my clipboard. We'll take this line right here and this part right here on line 19, the get component call, and paste in the sprite renderer because we don't need to get it anymore. We'll just use the one that we've already saved off. And the reason for this, by the way, is that getting components is an expensive, slow thing to do. Now we're going to go down to the update method and just get rid of line 33. And that's going to expose 2 errors. that we've got the sprite renderer referenced now on line 33. Oh, sorry, 3 errors, and 38 and 43 that don't exist. And that's because when I recreated this, I renamed it with an underscore. So we just need to add the underscore so that we're using that cached sprite renderer. So I'll go add the underscore to all 3 of them. And we're good to go. Now, if you're looking at this thinking, what about this big blaring on draw gizmos one? Why haven't we changed that? Shouldn't we use the sprite renderer? The answer to that is actually no. And there's a very important special reason for this. The way that Unity works, it has an object lifecycle. Objects are created, they run their methods, and then every frame they run another set of methods. So they run the awake method, the start method, and some other ones. They run their update, their gizmos, and a whole bunch of other ones. And then if they're destroyed, they'll run a destroy method. In fact, after this section, I recommend that you take a look at the Unity execution order documentation. It's right here. I'll make sure that it's linked, and maybe even go print it out. I have a printout of this available for me pretty much at all times, so I can look at it, see the order things are getting called in and where they are, and get an idea of a lot of the methods that I occasionally forget about. But it's important to know that this on draw gizmos one doesn't necessarily mean that the awake has been called. Even though it's after all of these other things, awake and start don't always get called in edit mode. It's kind of inconsistent. Don't expect them to be there. And it's okay to do that get component call in an on draw gizmos. Just expect to re-grab everything in the gizmos most of the time. All right, let's double check that code one more time, and then let's go try this out. Actually, we've got these private keywords here. Let's go get rid of those too. Just talked about those. Do the batch update or the alt and drag to select and then delete them. And then let's go look at the code one more time. Here it all is. It'll all be on the page as well. But once it looks good, let's jump over to Unity. Let's make sure we've saved and then try it out. We should still have the exact same functionality. We've just switched that sprite renderer over to be cached. Assuming that we didn't mess anything up, our character should switch between our jump and grounded or idle front states. So there he is. He's grounded. He's in the air. And let's see if I can get up. I don't think I can get up to that platform with my value of 5. Oh, there we go. Going a little bit on my jump, I made it. So there we go. Let's stop playing, go back into plastic, and let's say that we've added a jump icon, or jump graphic, not an icon, jump sprite to the player. And check in.